some of the most talented people in your team need to feel that they can be 100% themselves, or they're going to walk. That is where it becomes your problem.
So just accepting that mistakes happen at all levels
Yes.
just makes you a bit more human, because not only does that connect you with your workforce, it also encourages them that, hey, sometimes mistakes will happen. And if you start doing that, if you just start saying, maybe even like every now and then, it creates that dialogue and trust with your team.
Welcome to Leadership Rewired. Allison Allen and Dean Martin invite you to join them for an honest conversation that brings a personal perspective to the issues of leadership.
What if the secret to innovation and engagement and retention was actually just how you treated people and how safe you made it for them to work and be truly themselves? What if that's all you had to do?
What if?
Right? Not money, not a big promotion. You just made it safe. Today, we're going to be talking about psychological safety. Welcome to the Leadership Rewired podcast. I'm Allison Allen, one of your co-hosts. I'm joined today by Dean Martin, the second co-host. Hello. And we have Bhavik Shah with us. We're actually thinking of kidnapping him and having him being a key member of the Leadership Rewired podcast all the time, because we just enjoyed the last session. So let's just dive into the topic of psychological safety and what it is, what it's not.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely start. And again, Bhavik, lovely to have you here for our second recording in this series. What's, from your point of view and your experience, what is psychological safety, and how can we sort of move away from it being something that's just a buzzword, or maybe people have a strong reaction to it? But, what's really going on?
Yeah, great question. I love setting the foundation for a lot of these things. Psychological safety is essentially the freedom and the right to express your opinions, your feedback, essentially giving your perspective on things, whether that's the system is work, whether that's within your families and your communities, without the fear of any reprimanding or any fear of retaliation.
Right.
It's just having the freedom to express yourself in a place that's professional still, in ways that still align with company values, but you want to make sure that every employee feels this way so that they don't need to tiptoe around their feedback. The way to go around it, but essentially understand that this doesn't need to be a buzzword, is just knowing that people learn differently, they work differently. It's okay to have differing opinions as long as there's empathy in the conflict, rather than just shouting matches all the time. That's what leaders and organizations need to remember when we're fostering a culture of psychological safety.
But when you think about like the Harvard Business Reviews of the world, or any, quite frankly, any sort of mental health organization, they throw this word around, right? And a lot of leaders are first of all, as soon as you say psychological anything, all of a sudden it's like, either fear, or they're trying to run as fast as they can to get away from it. I think what you just described again is sort of the why. I think we should really lay the groundwork for the listeners as to what is it? What does that mean? Even the word safety could be triggering for someone. So how would you guys describe it? I mean, I have my textbook definition here, which I can read, but
read it.
I think it'd be really good for us to discuss it.
I love textbook definitions.
We're all about a textbook definition.
Okay, how about a textbook definition? Basically, this is literally about fostering an environment where team members feel safe to express their ideas. They can admit that they've made mistakes. They can challenge the status quo without any fear of negative consequences. No yelling, no screaming, no reprimanding, no throwing people under the bus. That they can actually do all of that and be themselves.
No secret conversations during performance management.
Right. And that there's a lot of organizations that you make a mistake and the reprimand can actually be fierce and out in front of everyone. Or, I remember working with a leader once who used to say when he used to give feedback to somebody, he would walk up to their desk and put his hands, physical hands, on their shoulder.
Oh, no.
And then they would know to go into a conference room so that he can give them feedback.
How do we normalize this? When did this become normal in the workforce?
I won't mention the organization because it's probably not a good idea, but I'm sure the leader who's listening is probably, going, Allison. Yeah. But I was coaching this leader and so first of all, your job is you never touch anyone.
All right.
Let's start there.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you do that, what do you think that signals to everyone else in the room? Because they know that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
So he doesn't do that anymore. And it's been a number of years, but So again, it's this notion of creating a space where people can be authentically themselves, can make mistakes, can take risk, to actually say, you know what? I actually think we shouldn't do that. We should do this. And feel safe doing that.
Yeah. And I think that safety word is quite emotional. Mm-hmm. But if we just understand it as an English word and even apply it to ourselves, anytime we feel threatened, even physically, we're not at our most creative.
Right.
It's our brains narrow its focus to one very specific way of how do I get out of this? How do I protect myself?
Right.
A drowning person is just thinking about one thing. Are you throwing me the life jacket or whatever?
Right.
It's not at ease. There's not let's bring other people in. There's no collaboration. There's not an openness. There's not a lightness.
Right.
Sure.
So therefore, psychological safety is if I'm in a work environment, I may not even put that language to it.
Right.
I may just say, I'm just trying to get through this meeting without thinking my manager is annoyed with me.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not me saying, hey, I've spotted an error. Can we double check on this? Or I've come up with this great idea. Or, hey, I'd love Bhavik's opinion on this. Or Allison did something nice. That's just pure survival. That's me managing my reputation.
Right.
And that we know, coming back to how you started, that's not what's going to make a team productive.
Yeah. Right.
And collaborative and do amazing stuff together. Everybody's just trying to stay alive.
Right. Especially today.
Yeah. And what I find interesting is that a lot of leaders forget that they were once in this position as well. Yeah. They were once junior. They were interns at one point, analysts trying to come up in their professional worlds. And they must have felt some sort of anxiety with their leadership team. Not always lacking psychological safety, but the natural dynamic is there. But for some reason, it seems like as soon as they've hit that peak of leadership, they have forgotten that a lot of people junior to them can also feel that level of anxiety or that level of unnervousness to ensure they're doing their jobs. Sure, the workforce has changed over the last 50, 60 years, and there are more guardrails now in the workforce, right? In terms of what is acceptable behavior and what's not acceptable behavior. Yeah. And I think we also have to acknowledge that a lot of the leaders right now have been brought up in a world that's very different than it is now.
Yes.
So there is a level of empathy of their understanding. Yeah. And we still have to hold them accountable.
Right. To make changes.
Right. Ignorance is not an excuse anymore, especially because you have the resources, you have the right agency and influence to learn and do better.
Right. What's interesting about what you just said is if I'm me, I'm always trying to channel that leader that I'm talking to. But if I'm one of those leaders listening to this right now, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so last week you were talking to me about mental health. Now you're talking to me about psychological safety. Yeah. Next week, you're going to be talking to me about what I'm supposed to do about all of this. Yeah. When am I supposed to do my job? Yeah. And my answer to that, and I love your point of view on this, is simply all of those things go together. Yeah. This is really boiling down to how you are treating people.
Very much so.
And how you want to be treated.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And making sure that that's just in the way that you lead your team. So we might be breaking it up in these different topics. But at the end of the day, this is about how are you creating safe spaces so that people can come and do their job and go home?
Yeah.
And feeling that they're engaged enough to come back.
Exactly.
Right.
And in all the ways that you are leading. So how do you set a direction in a way that is safe and you ask for feedback? How do you give directives to people in a safe way? How do you encourage collaboration? How do you model excellence? How do you coach? All the good stuff we know leaders need to do that leadership is. This is the mindset of how can I do it in a way that allows people to contribute. You're still leading. It's not a 10th extra thing you now need to do. Oh, I need to create psychological safety. It's through the way in which you are.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point, because a lot of people think it's like this other playbook that they have to embed into their leadership style.
Right.
It really comes down to, one, reflecting on your own actions.
Right.
How are you leading? And a lot of leaders don't do this because they've been so ingrained and socialized in leading in certain ways. Maybe that's because they were taught that way from their previous leaders, or they just believe that this is how leaders should show up in the workplace, with a little bit of fear. Right? Let's just say it. Like, there is a bit of fear, acknowledging that there's a power dynamic, and understanding what that will move people forward and get to the bottom line, and let people know that at the end of the day, we are in charge and you are moving towards our revenue. You're moving towards meeting our goals. Yeah. That reflection point is important. And for a lot of leaders I've worked with, they want to do this.
Yes.
Let's take away the equation of there are some leaders who are just not meant to lead.
Right.
I'm not going to address them. Because for me being in this space, I have to think about the
positive. That's another podcast.
Yeah, that's another podcast, another whole series maybe. But I like to think that there are a lot of other leaders out there who want to change and just don't know how to, or are under the water and just have low capacity. Right. Because that's how change is made. You work on the people who want to actively change. Yeah. For those folks, they just need to reflect on what's happening. Yeah. And then after they do that, they also have to acknowledge that things change. The world is literally changing overnight, day in and day out. Yes. Yeah. I think the world has changed since our last recording.
Yes.
The news cycle is constant. It's relentless. In the U.S., we're going through an election cycle. Yep. And for those folks who are alive and breathing and watching the news, they know exactly what is at stake here. Leaders are obviously acknowledging this, but are they adapting their styles and embedding the safety that we're talking about?
I think a lot of leaders are, probably trying to just, live in this world where all of these things are separate. Yeah. And I know this term of, we bring our whole selves to work is under attack these days. But this notion of, you can't separate what's going on outside from what's going on inside anymore. No one is saying, okay, let's all get in the room and talk about the election. That's not what I'm saying. Sure. Yeah. What I am saying is I might be impacted by the election in a very different way than you or you, right? And I'm allowed to be impacted, right? And that may be weighing heavy on me or not. And I still know I need to do a job.
Yes.
And I still know that I need to come in and do my work, because I'm not saying, give me a day off so I can deal with the election.
Right.
But just make space for the fact that I might be impacted, and there may not be this shiny Allison showing up. Yeah. It might be someone who's actually a little bit more somber. Yeah. Wanting to spend a lot more time alone, may ask to work from home a couple of days. And you creating that space for me to be able to be that is safety.
Or you may need a day off.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Right. Yeah.
Just understanding that if you take one day off and you'll show up even more productive and more engaged, what is the harm of that? Yeah. Yeah. Are we working in ICUs? Yeah. Like, are we working in emergency rooms?
Well, we aren't, but
yes. Well, I think most of the people, they're in corporate, right? We're looking at corporate functions. Yeah. Sure, a lot of other corporations, there's a nonprofit sector, people are serving communities, and things do seem urgent. And I don't want to take away from that work. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of things can be pushed out 24 hours with proper notice, with proper diligence.
Yes.
Because if we can alter our workloads and our capacities based on a last minute client request, and that's industry agnostic, then why can't we adapt 100%. for the human who's actually delivering the work?
I want to come back to something you said, though, around you're talking to the leaders who are looking for ways. Yeah. I think it's important to talk to the leaders who aren't paying attention to this, who aren't interested in paying. I think, and the reason why is because a lot of those leaders exist.
Of course.
And a lot of them are in key roles that are over the people who are trying to do something slightly different.
Yeah.
One way I find to address that group of leaders is really about bringing things back to dollars.
Yes.
Dollars and cents and talent.
Yep.
Yeah. And I won't say the organization, I won't even say the leader, but I remember being in a conference room in San Francisco.
Oh, I know the story.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're not going to say the name.
No, we cannot.
I still wake up screaming in the night thinking about that story.
I remember being, it's like 11:30 at night. Everyone is exhausted. This was after a bit of a takeover. And they were giving update on very talented engineers who had left. And this person's people were explaining, we've been on the phone with this guy. We've been explaining why they should come back, da, 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 da. And the one thing that they just said to us is, the guy said to us is like, I'm not coming back because I do not feel psychologically safe. And I'm watching these billionaires sitting across from me trying to understand what this even means.
Yeah.
Here's an engineer that they want. They know is like going to leave today
Critical
and
skills,
walk right into a job tomorrow, is like brilliant at what they do, saying out loud, I want to work in an organization where I can feel psychologically safe. When you think about, I don't have time for this, or when you think about, I don't even want to know what this means, some of the most talented people in your team need to feel that they can be 100% themselves, or they're going to walk.
Yeah.
That is where it becomes your problem.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
Right? And so figure it out. So in that vein, what do we think are some things that people can do or assess whether or not they're creating? Maybe that's where we start. Yeah. How do I assess whether or not I'm creating a space where people feel psychologically safe?
It's a great question, and I feel like this could be another whole podcast series. But I'll try to organize my thoughts. The first thing, it is that assessment piece. Like, where are we going in terms of psychological safety, and how is my leadership impacting that component of the organization? There are a few ways that organizations have done this successfully. The engagement surveys, if done properly, are a great tool to actually understand what is the landscape within your organization. You have to ask very specific questions, but there is a caveat that if you consistently are against psychological safety through your actions, so let's say screaming, let's say putting your unnecessary hands on folks, giving them that sort of verbal cue that things are about to go south, then no matter how much you engage with these surveys, people will not feel safe to even anonymously provide their feedback.
Right.
But let's assume that there is enough trust to put faith in an anonymous survey.
Right.
So I was working with an unnamed company that's pretty big in the media TV world. And it took us a while to embed these psychological safe questions in the survey. They were like, legal was involved and compliance was involved. And I asked them, what is your intention with this survey? If your intention with the survey is just to sit on it and collect dust, then fine, don't include these questions and we'll be fine. But if your intention is to really get a pulse check, really to understand how people are feeling, you have to ask these questions. Sure, we can generalize it, or we don't have to specifically name departments, or we don't have to specifically name people, but we have to ask these questions. Like, what motivates you to be at this organization? Do you see yourself in this role, in this organization in 2 years? That's another great question. Like, how is your talent moving? If your talent is already looking for other opportunities within the 2 years, right? Because we're all looking to cultivate leaders.
Yes.
But if they're leaving every 2 years, every 3 years, then there's a problem. Right. So you can deep dive into that data point and understand, like, why is that person leaving? Is it because the role is not expansive enough? So can we create more opportunities? Is it because of the leader? Is it because of the actual function of the job? Because some things can't change, right? If you're in a role that, like, for example, I was in investment banking for so long. Ultimately, it was stressful, but monotonous and boring at the same time. So I had heart palpitations over things that I knew how to do, but it was just the urgency of doing it. So it got really boring, but it was so stressful at the same time. But at the end of the day, that was my job. So if I didn't like it, no matter how much I progressed in the world, in that organization, I had to just move on. So people obviously will naturally move on. But if there is growth and there is opportunity and people are still leaving, that's a deep dive you want to do.
So one of the critical signs is that you would see is exits. And it sounds like also lack of sort of mobility within the organization.
Yes.
Are there any other sort of critical signs that you would notice? What if the engagement survey, because people probably didn't answer fairly, or I wasn't asked the right question. I just did that whole piece in LinkedIn around, are we asking the right questions? Because maybe we should change that. But I think there's something around, like what else can a leader see?
Right.
It comes back to a lot of the softer skills, right? Which then leads into your point about the bottom line, the data, the revenue, the talent.
Right.
Let's say, for example, if you are in a family or if you have friends and somehow you notice a behavior change, like if you're like, let's just say we're close friends, we go out every day to get coffee, or we work in a space every day, and all of a sudden I see behavior changes like, oh, Allison seems a bit more withdrawn, or Dean is not as chatty as they used to be. What happens? Like, are we just going to ignore that? You want to inquire in a way that seems empathetic, and you don't have to ask all the questions. You don't have to pry, like, tell me every single detail that's going on. Maybe you just need a day. Maybe you're just having an off day. Yeah. Like, where is the humanity in this?
Yes.
Like, can we bring that back, please? Yeah. Because if you're seeing someone who you are leading and you somewhat care about, there's a duty of care. You don't need to love them as a friend or family member, but you need to respect them enough as human.
Yes.
And if you see changes in their behavior, maybe you don't know how to do it, but maybe you can ask for support with your peer. Be like, hey, I'm leading this team. I have this team member who seems a bit more withdrawn, or I think this political event or this global event is impacting them. I don't know how to support them. What do you suggest?
Right.
It's just taking those first steps.
Yeah.
And then,
noticing.
Of noticing.
Yeah.
And that can't get tied back to a survey, unfortunately. No. You have to just be aware.
Yeah. I do think that there is something around a person's demeanor or a shift, dare I say, an energy, or does the team feel harmonious, or trying to, put one and one together and come up with at least three, and say, okay, this is happening, maybe this is impacting someone.
I like that. So a leader can, we're asking this question of what else can a leader look out for to know, have I created good psychological safety within my team, or is something off? The one then is that assessment and the being able to intentionally pick up on, like, I know my team, they're a little bit different. I think another thing for leaders to look at would be how deliberate are they in asking for ideas from their team,
right?
Asking good quality questions, not just like, hey, here's the plan. Are you good with it, guys? Okay, let's roll.
And then do it one time and then never talk about it again.
Well, I asked you for your feedback. If you are intentionally and openly coming into something saying, this is why I've hired them, because I want their insights, and to openly say, hey, I've probably got a blind spot around this.
Sure.
Of course, I cannot see everything about this project. Right. What have I missed?
Right.
What else, Allison? Do you have another idea?
Right.
So if you are doing that consciously, or you may not be aware of it, but listening to this podcast, you might go, oh, yeah, I actually do that quite a bit with my team.
Right.
Yeah.
That would then probably yield a behavior of people of their own accord approaching you.
Yeah.
And saying, I've got a question, or can I clarify this? So that's also something I would love leaders to consider and go, you might say, oh, my team's amazing. I meet with them, we have a plan, and they go off.
Right.
I don't hear from them and they're just working.
Right.
I would go, oh, hold on a minute.
Right.
Are your people coming back at any point saying, hey, I love this plan, but I've got a new idea?
Yeah.
Or, hey, you said A, B, and C. I'm really worried about that. Can I tell you why? Yeah. If people are not coming forward with their concerns, that's what psychological safety is. Can I come forward with my concern?
Right.
I've picked up on something that is worrying me. I've got a great idea. Yeah. Can I do it? Or is my manager going to freak out, feel undermined, threaten me, or say I'm a trouble causer?
Well, I think if you were to put that in a sort of like an action I can take.
Yeah.
I go back to my McKinsey days and I loved one of the guiding principles, which was, you are obligated to dissent.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful.
Like you're obligated to. Like, because we can't go out, push this project into a client, say this is the best thing you need to do from a strategy perspective, and you're sitting in the room going, it's going to bomb.
Yeah.
Right.
I can already tell you it's
right.
It's
and I loved it. And I think that actually ruined me for anybody I worked for after. A lot of people don't appreciate you dissenting, but it's really like in my core, so I can't do anything about it. But I do think that that's like, you could start there. Yeah. So to your point, I'm assigning this work or I'm giving you this project and I think this is what I think.
Yeah.
How about you go and you think and you do, and then come back and let's come to a happy medium around what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it.
You know what you're saying?
Yeah.
It's coaching them and sponsoring them.
Yes.
It's just taking that extra level of understanding that leaders are also in a position of teaching values and teaching working styles to folks who are underneath them. Yeah. Isn't that the point as you're coming up in your organization and you're starting off?
We talk about this all the time. We talk about like, is my frame, if you both report to me, it's just to get this work done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Of course.
And if you're both top performers or even medium to high performers that we had to kill ourselves to get, my job is also to treat you well so you'll stay.
Right.
And not to pay you enough money so you're not worried about money, making sure you have benefits and creating an environment where you'd be successful so you don't leave. That's also my job.
And you hired me for my great ideas and for his great experience and for his ability to spot errors and for my ability to be creative. Like you want that. Why would you hire us and then say,
and
be quiet,
mentor us.
Yes.
Teach us your ways. Let's see where our expertise can marry your knowledge and your experience.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that is that would require me to believe that I have something I can teach.
We're moving towards another podcast.
I'm in this seat because somebody gave me this job. I've been working here for 30 years and I know how to make the widgets and nobody makes the widgets better than I do. So you come in and you just make the widgets. Well, it goes back, what else do I need to teach you?
It goes back to what I was alluding to before at the beginning is that some people are just not qualified to lead. Yeah. And there are so many leaders that we all probably have collectively worked with that have gotten to their positions because of not because of competency.
Yeah.
They were the best at it. They were the best at it in the moment. But they don't know how to people lead. They've never gone through that actual training or that actual experience to lead people who have different ideas, who have different work experiences. Think about those folks who you get hired sort of mid-career, right? Have 10 years or so. They're not in the same position as new interns, new analysts. They have their experience already kind of molded into the workforce. They know exactly why they've been hired. And if they're not treated well, why would they sort of suck it up and just endure this?
I think that there was, and we are going into another podcast, but I think that there was a shift, and I don't know exactly when it happened, but there used to be this sort of over investment in leadership development, training, team. Like it was just like everywhere, big learning teams. And I think when organizations started making cuts, they used to cut learning teams first. Yep. And then because it was thought that the manager could teach. And so what's the point? So they can learn how to, and so that's where lead by example came up and, everything got creative. And I just think long term, what organizations have done is they've gotten a little bit sloppy on how they identify leaders. And they don't really think about why they're putting somebody in a role. It's usually about that team's gotten so big, we need to divide it. Who's the best person? That person. If we can get everybody on that team to do what that person does, that's going to build more products and build more things. Yeah. And I think it's the biggest mistake that, I don't mind saying this because I love this about Bloomberg, but it's like Bloomberg valued its individual contributors.
Sure.
Like leaders were put in place to take care of individual contributors who were the ones that would do the work. Yeah. That was really, you were a leader. You didn't go around going, I'm a leader and I'm important. I mean, you did. People did that, but it wasn't really about that. It was like, what are you doing in that organization? How are you motivating people? How do you make sure people are taken care of so they can do work? Yeah. And I kind of like it. Yeah. Right. And so choices around leadership weren't these sort of flippant decisions. They used to be more around the best, and then they got more around who are the best people to lead. Let's talk about that. That's a nice segue. So what are the sort of leadership behaviors you need to exhibit if you're creating an environment that's psychologically safe? We kind of talked about it here, and you care about developing people. Yeah. What else?
One of the things I've seen, and I personally do in roles I'm in leadership roles, that you have to role model vulnerability. Again, that's another word that's been buzzed out of the ethos, and people get a little bit vulnerable. I know people are vulnerable, but let's break that down. What that actually means. Yeah, it's understanding that one, you even as a leader can make mistakes.
Yes.
Maybe that's with a current sale that you made, like, hey, we should have never actually brought on this client because it doesn't align with our values. Or it could have been with capacity. It could have been with just anything. Just acknowledging that there was a mistake made, but I have enough skill set to remediate that. You know, and this is what our plan is, to acknowledge and remediate.
Yes.
But then also invite others to opine in on the solution. Like, what do you all think? Like, this is what I think we should be doing. So just accepting that mistakes happen at all levels just makes you a bit more human, because not only does that connect you with your workforce, it also encourages them that, hey, sometimes mistakes will happen. We obviously don't want to encourage mistakes, but it's just naturally going to happen because maybe there's a rush delivery, or maybe there's, whatever. There's like countless reasons why people make mistakes. Then they can go up like, hey, leader, I made this mistake, but this is also what I plan to do about it. This is my remediation plan. This is how I'm going to acknowledge it, involve the relevant collaborators to get them up to speed on this mistake, and let's work together on this. Because not only does it show them, the leader, that you've acknowledged it, you're owning up to this mistake, you're showing accountability, but you also have an action plan. Because that's what a lot of leaders care about. Like, fine, you made a mistake, but now what? What are we doing about this? How are we going to fix it? And if you start doing that, if you just start saying, maybe even like every now and then, you don't have to share the biggest mistakes you made.
Right.
The small things, it creates that dialogue and trust with your team.
Yes. I think another way of sort of saying what you also said is, I think if I sit in this seat and I think I own the work, own the decisions, and I have to own the expertise, that's a lot of sort of pressure and in the spirit of pushing into the organization, developing people, I need to give people space and autonomy to maybe do the work differently.
Yes.
Or, to your point, if I admit that I made a mistake, you know what, I bombed on this, can you think about it? It's another way, again, of showing I make mistakes, but two, I need some new thinking on this. And so again, how do I empower people? What are some other leadership behaviors?
Well, you spoke a little bit earlier about the self-awareness. And I think in order to demonstrate this growth mindset or vulnerability, I think leaders need to be able to to demonstrate self-love for how they are showing up. So knowing what their skill set is and what their fallibility is, what their thinking style preferences are. They can be aware of that and appreciate that there's difference in others. Then they can then see the value in other people's thinking. So if I just think, well, this is how you run a project, why would I want to ask for anyone else's opinion? But if I go, oh, I like to run a project and it's really organized and logical. Allison, I know, has a strong leaning towards understanding the impact on people. Oh, Bhavik's got a great point of view of, like, he likes to think of things conceptually at a high level. Of course, then there's a value for me to be able to say, what do you think? What do you think?
Right.
Because it doesn't mean mine is bad. It means I have a strength. So I think that's one behavior that we can also see and develop as leaders, which is get to keep on working on yourself. Keep on understanding, what are you good at? Where are your strengths? And how does that impact on others? And then appreciate how others work differently. So you can be explicit in that.
I love that.
The only two I would add to what you both said is, I think a leader has to be keeping their head lifted up and looking at what's going on with the team. Looking at, you don't even have to look at individuals all the time. Just what's going on with the team and how are you connecting that team? Are there shared values and goals? Is there harmony? Are people clear on what they're supposed to be doing and not doing? Looking at the team. Notice I didn't say take the team for drinks.
No.
Take them to a baseball game. I'm just saying, where are those moments in which you connect with the team? You make sure everybody's clear on what they're supposed to be doing. Asking, are there any roadblocks? That's a favorite question for people. Sometimes people think they have to deal with the pain that you've put them in. If you just simply say, are there any roadblocks? Are there any concerns? Everybody's set on what they're doing. Simple questions, looking at that team. And the only other one I would throw out there is lead by example. So if you are a leader who has multiple levels within your organization, model the behavior for your directs that you want to see through the entire team.
Yeah.
And then the directs then become the people who take it to their teams and so on and so on. So those were the only other two.
Can I add to that real quick around, and this is one of my favorite points as well. So if you're modeling something, I would say if you want a double whammy on that, be explicit in the modeling.
Yes.
So don't just say, oh, this is how things screwed up. Just say, hey, I want to be really clear with you around this is a calculated risk I took and it didn't work out.
Right.
And this is the consequence of it, and this is how we're going to fail. Recover.
Yeah.
So you showing people, you naming it, and then you modeling that good behavior.
Exactly.
I was just going to add it. You put a great segue in is transparency.
Yeah.
How important transparency is for leaders to exhibit on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
Because so many decisions come last minute. They seem a bit of a whirlwind, especially if you're working in a high-paced industry. You have to make decisions that sometimes are uncomfortable or it's not inducive to culture when it comes to the organization. Right. And if you tell your team that, hey, this is a decision we made because of X, then people know why they're working late. They know why they have to log in during a holiday weekend. Right. They understand why they have to be on call for certain things.
Right. Yeah.
It's just giving them a little bit more understanding that this may be something that we just have to deal with. And it's hard, it's difficult. We're asking a lot of labor from you.
Yep.
And this is the reason why. Yeah. Most of the times, employees are left in the dark and they don't understand the reasoning behind these long hours, the decision to engage with a client who obviously does not value the same mission and ethics of the organization. Yeah. But we work in a capitalistic structure, so we can't take that away from people. And giving them that decision-making transparency is going to go a long way of building trust and empathy across the workforce. Yeah.
So we've talked about how psychological safety, is really about creating an environment where people can make mistakes, they can take risks, they can challenge the status quo. Yeah. We've talked about how you can recognize whether or not you're creating an environment that's psychologically safe. You can use engagement data. You can look across the team. Is there harmony? Are you noticing things out of whack? Are projects not being delivered? Are people not being developed? Are people leaving?
Yeah.
Right? And then we've talked about some leadership behaviors that people can exhibit or lean on. Adaptive leadership, team building, vulnerability. We talked a lot about being transparent. What have we not talked about in terms of this topic that we think is really important to share in the last few minutes?
What are we doing in those high moments of stress? Because a lot of this happens usually in specified days or hours of training or self-reflection. Right. And what I've seen, especially working 12 years in financial services, that when things hit the fan, all of this work on yourself as a leader or your team just literally in an instant goes out the window. Yeah. So we have to start thinking about contingency plans. About what are we doing in those high moments of stress. And most of the time, if you ask anyone working in this day and age, there are more stressful moments than calm moments.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we can do is, like, for example, if we're just getting on this journey of cultivating safety at the workplace, think about the reflection and the assessment and the transparency. Yeah. And then try to embed small changes within your day-to-day if you're working on a project, if you have a deadline. And then once you have a bit of breathing room, maybe that project is delivered or you're waiting for feedback, just do another reflection like, hey, did this work?
Yeah.
Did we actually achieve what we're intended to do? Yeah. If not, what can we do the next time around? Yes. And those small changes then become a foundation that gets built upon all the cultivation of the work that you're doing. Yeah. But if you don't do this, so let's say if you're doing this around July or August when things are a bit slower, and then the rest of the 10 months of the year you're just constantly working lean and you're creating avenues for more burnout, then this is not going to work.
Right. It has to be something that you're thinking about all the time.
It's strategic. It has to embed into the organization.
And I also think there is something about, in those stressful moments, if you have created an environment of psychological safety, people will recognize when you miss a step that this is just one of these moments. And there's no sort of like, oh my God, let me sort of tuck my tail between my legs and don't say anything.
Right.
It's just, okay, this is a stressful moment.
Sure.
And they recognize what it is for what it is.
And a way to embed it is also in those quieter moments to build it into a process.
Right.
So that it's not contingent on the leader saying, oh, does anyone have a question or have I missed anything?
Yeah.
That you just say, this is how we run this type of meeting. Or when we have this type of one-to-one, I always open with these 3 questions.
Right.
Yeah.
Come hell or high water, this is what I do. So it's not just me having to remember. It's like, I'm just going to go. What did I miss, folks?
Yeah. It comes down to how would you engage any other integration in your workforce?
Nice.
Think about change management principles. This needs to be treated in the same manner. If we're separating all this work, which is mental health, DEI, safety, and then doing the business as is and keeping them separate, this is never going to be successful.
Right.
But think about all the acquisitions that have happened in the workforce. Think about if a new system comes, we're adapting now to AI.
Yeah.
There are processes and procedures and there are PMs and there are business analysts.
Yes.
There has to be change management elements into this integration as well, so that you can stay agile and adaptive. And that's exactly what I do with my work. It's how to leverage change management into this psychological safety, into this mental health work, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So you've just secured your spot on the next podcast, which is where we're actually talking about where, what is the leadership actual actions and steps to take to build environments around, that support mental health, that support psychological safety. So as always, we really want to just thank everyone for listening in. I love having these guys around me and talking about these topics. Moments like this, I start to feel safe. And I think to myself, where was this when I was like, a first-time leader? It wasn't, these were not the things we talked about.
No.
As a person who was a leadership facilitator, these are not the things we talked about, nor are the things we've done. So we have a lot of work to undo what's been done and start to stand up the next generation of leaders. And we believe that the Leadership Rewired podcast is all about that. So thank you for listening in. Please subscribe. Please give us your feedback. Please tell us what we could do better. Please let us know, what you think of this topic. And if we need to go deeper, we want your feedback. So thank you very much for listening. And until next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.